A good nerve, Shabbos. Before the Torah can teach us how to be Jewish, it's got to show us insight into how to be human. When people ask, isn't it enough just to be a mensch, to be a good person? They're getting a little bit backwards. Being a mensch is not the ultimate goal. It's the baseline for everything that will be built. On top of that, you do have to be a mensch. But if you stop there, you've missed out on your potential. It's not just about doing no harm. It's really about transforming things into something better, revealing the good at their core and having a positive impact on the world. Emotions and feelings of wonder and anxiety, guilt, shame, blame, pride, envy, it's all here in this very first Torah portion, Parshat Bereishis, the portion of in the beginning. We also find in here some of the darker side, avoidance of responsibility, survivor guilt, and desire to build and desire to profit and benefit, desire to procreate and to isolate. After the brief encounter of the creation, which you could unpack over a lifetime and still barely plumb the depths of its explanation and wonderment, human beings appear on the scene on day 6. To those who complain that there are too many mitzvot, too many obligations and responsibilities, we offer the counterexample of Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava in the garden. They had one mitzvah, one commandment to follow, and it was a don't. Not even something you have to do, it was a don't, as in don't eat from the tree. And they had to keep this mitzvah for about an hour, from the time of their appearance until the beginning of Shabbos, according to the Gemara in Sanhedrin. And that was too much. The problem, it seems, is not how many mitzvahs there are. The problem is that people don't like to be told what to do. That's a challenge that we have to deal with. When the first people failed with the first mitzvah, what was the instinct? To avoid blame. God asks Adam, did you eat what I told you don't eat? Adam blames everyone but himself in one stunning move. The woman that you gave me, she told me to eat it. He shifts responsibility from himself to both God and his wife. That's a man for you. Fellas, don't do this at home. Take responsibility. Don't blame God. Don't blame the missus. Own up to your own shortcomings. And yet this is who we are as a species. We don't like being called out for our mistakes, and we will instinctively, even reflexively, blame others instead of taking responsibility ourselves. The next gen, unfortunately, doesn't fare much better. Cain kills Hevel. Cain kills Abel in a moment of jealousy and envy, because it seems God favors Abel's offering over Cain's. The Midrash tries to mitigate his crime. Maybe he didn't know what killing was. Maybe he was just mimicking animals at play. In any case, Cain could not have known that he was perpetrating humankind's first genocide. 1/4 of the world's population was wiped out. It could well be that the lesson here for us is that whoever kills his brother. To be sure, we're shown by this dreadful example that it's much easier to act in a moment of violence than to carry the consequences. Cain cries out to the heavens, my guilt is greater than I can endure. The generation of Enosh, son of Seth, son of Adam, introduced idolatry to humankind, according to Rashi's explanation, imagining and putting their trust in tangible, visible idols. This belief skewed the vision of humankind for ages, perhaps even to our times. Maimonides explains the origins of idolatry as having had good intentions. People felt the drive to recognize the instruments or channels of divine benevolence, the sun, the water, the tides, the rain, and so on. Eventually, this led to worship of the instruments rather than God as the ultimate source of life and good. That may be where our world is today. We put our trust in the instruments rather than in the source of healing, wealth, power, and so on. It stems from the beginning. In short, things did not go so well in this first parsha. As humankind reproduced and increased and civilization spread, perhaps the most salient human characteristic emerges, the inability to learn from mistakes. The quote was made famous in the 20th century, we all know it, but we see its origins in these first incidents, in the first passage of the Torah, which describes the human condition from its earliest stages. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. In fact, after the human drama of murder, shame, guilt, and blame, by the end of Parshas Bereishis, in some ways we're back to square one. The last Aliyah says, quote, God saw that the wickedness of man was great upon the earth, and that every product of the thoughts of his heart was but evil. And God reconsidered having made man on earth with heartfelt sadness. And God said, I will blot out man, whom I created, from the face of the earth. End quote. And then the last words of the Parsha, except for Noah, who found favor in God's eyes. So we know what's coming next. That experiment of creating a species so independent of thought and so able to chart its own course came to naught, a failed experiment. God regretted it and vowed to wipe the slate clean and begin again. This would only happen this once that we know of, although Midrashim speak of many worlds created and destroyed before this one. What is the greatest stumbling block we can learn about in this portion of origins, this story of beginnings? Is it the human tendency to shy away from or avoid responsibility toward and our connection with God? Maybe it's that we don't want to have such an intimate, ongoing connection with the boss. Maybe we're more comfortable with checking in periodically, maybe a couple times a year, if that. Other than that, let me do my thing and let God do God's thing. That really sidesteps the issue of how closely these two are connected. But be that as it may, we enjoy the illusion of independence and self-sustenance more than we'd be troubled by confronting the reality of our dependence. Or maybe that's not the worst shortcoming. Maybe it's man's inhumanity to man, as the phrase goes. We'll see next week from two examples of the flood and the Tower of Babel, the Tower of Babel, where the technicians of the age forgot about God and built a tower purely for self-aggrandizement, to make a name for ourselves. This was punished, interestingly, less severely than the generation of the flood, where they behaved callously, even criminally, toward one another in flagrant betrayal of one another's humanity. The moral of the story may be that God can handle, so to speak, being marginalized. In our awareness, it's when we ignore the divine reflection, the basic dignity of integrity of each other, and integrity of each other, that we do the greatest disservice toward our mission on earth. Or maybe yet another option. It's our own failure to live our own lives with integrity, with accountability, with honesty. The wriggling of Adam in response to God's questioning him still rankles us, because we see our own inclination to shirk reflected in his. What do you want from me? It was her. She told me it was okay to eat. And where did I find her in the first place? You introduced us. That's how Adam speaks to God. If we listen to it, surely this is a stunning indictment of our own desire to find a scapegoat, anyone else to blame, as long as we don't have to take the heat personally. Well, it's truly a three-way contest. Our dishonesty to each other, to ourselves, and to God all contribute to our status as considerably less than angels. Yet, perhaps it's that fourth dimension, the reluctance to learn from our mistakes, that causes us ceaselessly, it seems, to condemn ourselves to repeating them. It's noteworthy that this week of Bereishis, in fact, the day of Isru Chag, the day following Simchas Torah, when all the holidays have concluded, we've wept, we've begged, we've apologized, we've implored, we've rejoiced, we've danced and sang. The day after that is the day that Canada chooses as its first ever national day for truth and reconciliation. The awful discoveries of unmarked graves of hundreds of children, thousands of children this summer on the sites of former residential schools horrified the nation. It may be no less shocking to learn that these residential schools were in operation until, wait for it, 1998. This system of some 140 schools or so across Canada, often run in cooperation with one or the other of the churches, was meant to break and eliminate Indigenous culture and language from among young people. You know the story. The commission to get to the bottom of this dark chapter in history began soon thereafter, and one of its steps was a formal apology and recognition of guilt on the part of the federal government, which Prime Minister Harper did in 2008. Various commissions investigating reparations and other amends to be made undertook their conversations in the years to come. But these revelations just this year added another facet to the inhumanity foisted upon native populations over the past 2 centuries. Canada certainly prides itself on the openness and tolerance of its pluralistic community, and rightfully so. Must have been a pretty severe blow to learn of these new revelations, even though some argue that the worst of them were for the most part perpetrated in the church-run schools, which might not surprise anyone. But rather than focus on the past history, let's look at how these revelations were addressed. First of all, even though it took 100 years, these schools have finally closed. Second, the government has acknowledged that it was complicit in this act of violence toward a culture and against individuals, and stated in word and in print that it was wrong, and apologized, took responsibility for that wrongdoing. Next, attempts are being made, certainly not limited to this day of commemoration this week, to bring this awful thing to public awareness. Moreover, to make gestures and take concrete actions that show a desire and drive to ensure that this kind of inhumanity, does not recur. The surest way to break the cycle, to stop the same mistakes from happening over and over, is to identify them by name, admit the wrongdoing, take ownership of it, and stay conscious in order to prevent more of the same. Now what often happens is different mistakes, fine, but at least not the same ones over and over. That's the beginning of the process of transformation. That is making positive change, taking real action to leave things in a better way than we found them. The story of creation in Parshas Bereishis points up a noteworthy distinction between divine creation and human creativity. God's is creatio ex nihilo, from nothing into something. All our creativity involves taking something and fashioning it into something else. That dynamic also applies to transformation. When God wants a new world, the process is just that, make a new world. We, on the other hand, can neither destroy a whole world nor create a new one. We have to transform the world that we have, working with the tools and materials we have. And that involves this elusive but all essential ability to learn from our mistakes. If we can learn from what happens and make sure next time around that at least something different happens, means we don't keep making the same mistakes, we're onto something. We're on the right track. Something that encompasses our mission here for however many years we're given, to leave things in a better state than we found them. It takes a long time, and success is not always readily visible. There's a lot of cycling back and around because we need to revisit in order to improve. But that's how it happens, bit by bit, a day at a time, a mistake, an admission, an apology at a time, a parsha a week at a time. We move things toward a better state. We put in our contribution to make things better than they were and pave the way for those after us to continue the work. May all our work in this direction be blessed with success that we can see. Shabbat Shalom.